Hi, I'm Chike Coleman. That's Sanford, and this is Real Reviews Home Edition, the show where we talk about movies from our homes. I hope you are comfortable. This week's episode is one that I've been really excited to do. Uh, our two films are Happiest Season and New Mutants. I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler. I love one of these films. I dislike the other. Having said that, let's talk about our first movie, Happiest Season. Sandra, will you please deliver the premise?
Sure, I'll do my best. Happiest Season introduces us to a happy couple at the beginning, which is Abby and Harper, played by Mackenzie Davis and Kristen Stewart. And they are a couple early in their relationship. Both women are very content with the way things are going, and so much so that Harper takes Abby up into in the spirit of the moment and invites her home for Christmas. Well, they are driving to Harper's house when Harper has to make the admission that actually she did not come out to her parents when she said that she did, and that Abby is going to have to pretend that she is her roommate. So they get to Harper's house, and we're introduced to Harper's family with her high-strung mother and her father, who is a mayoral candidate, and her two sisters. And she introduces Abby as her roommate, who her mother then puts into the basement in an old room downstairs. Now, the movie from that point goes on a somewhat typical romantic comedy home for the holidays kind of slant, with the extra gag that, they're trying to hide from everybody the fact that they're in a relationship and don't want to be caught together, and a couple times they almost are. The movie moves forward, and what happens is that actually, as they're home, Harper winds up being reconnected with, through her mother, her high school boyfriend and her high school friends, and starts to create a distance between Abby and Harper, where Harper is spending more and more time with her high school buddies, and Abby is feeling left out and actually winds up hanging out with I don't remember the name's character. Aubrey Plaza's character, Riley, who actually was Harper's first romantic affair in high school years. So Abby is sort of hanging out with this other woman, and Harper is spending time with her friends. Jealousy ensues. Things come to a head, and ultimately there's a big showdown in which everybody puts their cards on the table. The relationships between Abby and Harper are put out there for discussion, as well as Harper and her sister come to a huge conclusion. And this being a romantic comedy, it actually wraps up in a fairly satisfying way with, in the end, Harper does come out to her parents. Abby is accepted as part of the family, and we're treated to a nice end credits montage of 1 year later pictures that actually came off fairly well. So this movie is a bit of I'm going to describe it as a straight up the middle romantic comedy at the Christmas time. Now, the fact that it has a couple that are two lesbian women is probably what sets it apart. But for the most part, this thing sticks to all the formulaic things. For example, when Abby's job is a pet sitter, she's a student, but pet sitting is what she does for money. And when she's going to be gone, she assigns that to her friend John, who kills the fish, which is such a classic comedy move. And then you get that, that line of, hey, if I was going to get a fish like that, where would I buy a fish like that? Which is, it's been, I can't even tell how many, movies have involved that kind of a plot device. So ultimately, this is actually, I'm gonna go ahead and give my review. This is actually a fairly enjoyable, straight up the middle lesbian romantic comedy. It had me laughing a number of times, and it had, I can't really say I was in the Christmas spirit, because to be honest, I don't ever get in the Christmas spirit, but it was a fun holiday.
There.
Yeah, right. It was a fun holiday movie, and I actually, I really found myself enjoying it a lot more than I expected. And I'll say, finally, my last part of my review, my favorite part of this movie, by far, was her younger sister, Jane. Jane just cracked me up in like every scene that she was in. So kudos to her for the comedic effects. Chike, what did you think of the Happiest season?
Happiest Season's one of those movies where you're just like, I feel like I know what I'm in for. And this is also one of those movies where you say, I know what I'm in for, but I don't care because what's the representational spin on it? You know, there are black Christmas movies. There have been Caucasian Christmas movies for as long as time has been going on. Um, but I think representation in that space of a holiday film is so important. I feel like that's been largely neglected up until 2019, 2020, because I feel like the world doesn't see that group of people as people who deserve respect, love, and their own stories to be told in a unique and engaging way. This is without doubt the goal of Happiest Season. And largely I think it's achieved. Mostly because Kristen Stewart is hilarious in the odd ways she's trying to sort of push her girlfriend out of the closet, and Mackenzie Davis in the ways of trying to stay in the closet because she doesn't want the retribution that would come with coming out. These are very relatable things that are part of couples' relationships that can derail them in honest ways. And there is one point, and we haven't talked about this, where Harper's sister realizes that she's gay. And as a result of the reveal, instead of saying, yep, I totally am, she says, no, I'm definitely not. And unfortunately, that tragic moment is part of a lot of the lives of people who are in the LGBTQ plus sphere. And it was a touching, heartbreaking moment for me because I was like, oh, yeah, if I was backed into a corner like that, I'd probably do the same thing. But who it affects, the ripple of that decision causes the chasm that was growing between them to grow so much wider. Not because it's dishonesty, but because it's not being your true authentic self. And I think that's ultimately what holiday movies are supposed to teach us. Be genuine, care about people, but above all, be your true authentic self. And if there's any film that echoes those principles in funny and mildly engaging ways, it's The Happiest Season. And
Yeah,
that's why I love it.
yeah, I'm going to second you. I think that it really dealt very sensitively and intelligently with a lot of these things. I mean, that scene you're talking about, that was a really honest moment. And actually, the film did a good job with giving you the backstory of what had happened to her, to the same character in high school, and why she had, denied, being a lesbian in high school, and what a kind of impact that had on other people. That was a really touching moment. And then it led to, I thought, a really great scene between Amber, Kristen Stewart, and her friend John, where
Yeah.
he goes through the sort of, hey, look, everybody has their coming out story. You have your coming out story. I have my coming out story. This is her coming out story. I mean, I was watching all of this, and I could completely relate. And here I am, a straight white guy, but it was, I really enjoyed those moments of the movie. I thought it was very touching. I thought it was, at the same time, it never got mawkish.
Right.
It was funny. It
Mhm.
was well written, well acted, well directed. I was really much more impressed by this movie than I expected.
And I've known the director Clea Duvall as a fantastic actress when she was, being an actor in the Spear. She was in a bunch of things that I really loved. I got to remember all of them now. I
What
felt
was
like she was in one of my favorite teen movies of all time, which was Can't Hardly Wait. if I'm not mistaken,
Okay.
she was always an engaging presence on screen, and to turn her hand to directing and directing this piece, it's if that's her first feature, it's probably the finest first start of any director this year.
I agree. I mean, she wrote it, she directed it. She had a real vision for this, and I really do love that she kind of stuck to some of the cliches of the holiday movie. So, I
Proving that
mean,
they can be done outside of the bounds of just straight white people or straight black men.
right, right. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I always try to find, one or two things to sort of critique upon. In this one there wasn't too much. I did think that the scene in the lounge with the two men dressed in drag singing kind of Christmas stuff. I
Yeah.
felt like that scene went on about 3 minutes too long. you know but I think that was me relating to the characters because I felt Kristen Stewart's fear at having that person walk up to the table and stick a microphone in your face and being asked to
Yeah,
sing in
because
front
you
of
know
everybody.
that would happen.
Yeah, because I was like, oh God, no, 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 don't let, no, 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 so but I mean, again, just that as an example, that was really a touching scene. There wasn't a lot of wasted stuff in this movie because I mean, even that scene is an example where she built up the rapport and learned this backstory about her, from the high school relationship and all that. So I really want to credit this movie on so many levels. I felt like this is a really well executed, you know, romantic comedy for the holidays. And regardless of whether you're gay or straight, I think anybody would enjoy this. And I would say that, I don't think there was anything in this movie that was like, highly sexualized.
No, not at all. And that also makes it. I don't know whether that makes it better or worse. I
Better.
would probably have felt better if they did do more of that than the lack of it that they did.
I mean, but any romantic comedy that I mean, think about like I don't know, any romantic comedy. They're not going to have hugely sexual scenes, and this one doesn't either. And that means it's safe that you could watch it with your family. You could watch it with
Yeah, and,
kids
and
above
and
a
that
certain
makes
age.
perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you watch it with kids, they're going to be more bored by the kissing than anything
Yeah,
else.
that's true. And here's what I'll say about that. Like, depending on the holiday movie, you can up that level of affection or decrease it. And I think Duvall knew who her audience was for this film and realized that that wasn't needed. It would have been nice to have that equal to what you would see in other holiday movies, because then the playing field with holiday movies would be level. But we're not there yet. Plain and simple, which is not a great. That's a critique on the industry rather than a critique on the film itself.
Okay,
Um,
so available on Hulu.
yes,
And, I think that speaks also just to where cinema is in 2020. Probably this would have had a theatrical release if we were not in a pandemic.
hmm,
But, I don't think it necessarily would have gone straight to Hulu because there's a decent amount of name recognition in the character in the actresses here.
yes.
Not just the two leads, also Aubrey Plaza, but Mary
Sean Levy.
yeah, Mary Steenburgen. I mean, there's, Anna Gasteyer was, I think, underused. I didn't
Oh,
really care
Anna
for her.
Gasteyer was great.
So, I just got to say, I really want to recommend this movie to people who are maybe looking for something different this year for the holidays.
I would too.
So, wait a
And
minute. So, if you like that movie, then what does that mean about the next discussion?
the New Mutants came out in, I want to say technically 2020, but it's been done since I think 2017.
I think they wrapped up shooting in 2018.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they wrapped up shooting in 2018. They've released it in 2020. The studio, first and foremost, had a lot of input on what the ending product of this movie was. First, they were saying, "Oh God, it's too scary. You don't want to do that." Then they're saying, okay, you muted it and toned it down, it's not scary enough. So then you bring back most of the elements of the scary stuff. Essentially, what it is, it's about a girl named Blue who lives in a village. Um, I don't want to say that she's Native American because
She's
is
Cherokee.
that fair?
No, she's Cherokee.
Cherokee. Okay, so she's Cherokee, and there is a giant bear just mauling her town. And she doesn't know why. She's scared. She's hiding in her cabin, and by the time she wakes up, the whole thing is destroyed. Her family is dead, and she is, for lack of a better word, because we can't really see it happen, captured and taken to a facility. In that facility, she is told that she has a gift, and they want to train her with it, but not in the way we've seen it done with the X-Men. They want to just slowly find out what the power is and how to use it. And she feels okay with that because she kind of knows the people, but she still wants to get to her family. She has that longing for that. She meets a friend slash eventual partner named Rain, who has the ability to turn into a dog, a giant dog, and then she meets the other characters who I'm gonna just say it. They're all douches and dicks. They're awful people. They are insulting to her in multiple ways in relation to her Cherokee heritage. Especially a actress that I love, Anya Taylor Joy, who might be the bitchiest person I've ever seen in a movie in the history of ever, because she just never lets up, and Blue just lets it rub off her shoulder like it's snow. But they have a conflict, and they start to realize that the reason they're being kept here and they're not allowed to go out of this facility is because they're part of a project of basically being used as super soldiers, and they don't like that very much. And they finally, toward the end of the film, take on the establishment and, in a way, their greatest fears. Um, I don't like this movie for multiple reasons. I hate that the heritage of the main character is used as a punchline. I don't feel like they develop Rain enough to where you can actually truly care about her development with Blue. Anya Taylor-Joy's character just doesn't feel interesting to me. She just feels like she has to be the bully no matter what. And the two guys, I think there's two. I remember correctly, there's two guys.
Yeah.
They're both cocky in different ways that I just don't. The fire guy is cocky until he actually gets lit on fire. And I forget what the other one's power is. Do you remember?
Cannonball.
Right. So none of these people were relatable. This movie should have been much like Happiest Season. In the darkness, you find ways to celebrate your differences. That didn't happen until the last 5 minutes of this movie. That means you spent 85 minutes watching them be evil to each other for no reason. Bully each other, degrade each other, except for Rain and Blue. They were pretty much solid all the way through until, Blue had a bit of a hissy fit and shut Rain out for maybe 7 minutes in the entire movie. Maisie Williams is a great actress, but they underserved her here in terms of what they allowed her to do, say, and build the character. She spent her entire 8 years of life around wolves and things like that for Game of Thrones. You couldn't give her one other decent plot point other than being bullied by a priest? Really? I see why there were a lot of studio notes, because they didn't know what the heck to make of this movie. I hate it for that reason, because I think it could be so much better explored if the director had full control, more time to really build this group up as a better family than he ended up having them be. And you could have possibly had a sequel or two on your hands in the Disney Plus crowd had this been better done. I hate this movie for what it could have been, and also for what it turned out to be. Even though I like Anya Taylor-Joy and Maisie Williams, the whole performances across the spectrum were not my favorite, and they could have been injected with so much more care. And that's not the actor's fault. That's not even Josh Boone, the director writer's fault. That's the fault of the studio for interfering as much as they were. Having said that, if you're a completist, I would recommend seeing this film. But if you want something with more care and more celebration of differences, I'd stick to the original and the prequel X-Men franchises. Having said that, Sanford, what do you quickly think about the New Mutants?
Well, let me explain that because you mentioned from a completist standpoint. So this is considered an X-Men movie, I saw. In fact, it's considered the last X-Men movie, which is a depressing statement until they reboot it. I actually, so I got to tell a little story about myself. When I was, I don't know, let's say I was 10 or 11, I was at camp and somebody had the X-Men Phoenix Saga, and I devoured that comic book. I just thought that was so great. And then I started reading comics for a while. And at that time, I was reading the X-Men was one of my comics, and then the other one was the New Mutants. So there was a period of time where I was like, and New Mutants was a relatively new book at the time. And it was a very creative book. I mean, it had all kinds of really cool and outlandish drawing styles. It had really crazy plots and weird characters. It was a different kind of comic. So I was really excited at the idea of a New Mutants movie because it does have the freedom to be different from like a standard superhero movie. I will say, unfortunately, this one labors, first of all, from something you touched upon, which is being the first movie of a superhero franchise is hard because you got to tell backstories. And I think this movie did a poor job at that. Now, one thing that this movie did, and I don't think this was the case in the comics, at least I can't recall it, but I didn't read it from the beginning. Each of these characters had a very tragic backstory, much more tragic than I ever recall for their characters. And each of them was actually a darker character than they were. So just Cannonball is an example. The guy, he has the ability to fly through the air and bounce off stuff. In this one, he has almost a death wish because he actually caused the death of his father and a bunch of other people. In the comics, he was much more of a happy-go-lucky guy. Similarly, Sunspot, who in this one has a tragic backstory because he killed somebody he loved unintentionally. That was never the case. He was a very happy. He was kind of a Romeo guy in the comics. So, they've taken these characters and gone down some pretty dark paths. What my biggest complaint about this movie is why screw up what was already really cool? I mean, they, just right off the bat, the main character, Danny, her power, the name of her character is Mirage. She causes people to see their greatest fear. Now that happens in this movie, but unlike Hello Mirage, it actually becomes that their fears manifest and become real.
Yeah.
It's a very strange direction to take the plot in. And honestly, completely unnecessary because they could have done so much more. So I'm going to say, I guess my quick review is I was ultimately really disappointed by this movie in terms of what it could have been. Now, I will say that it is not your typical superhero movie, and I appreciate that. It is dark in several different ways, and I appreciate the depth to it. I thought that they did a good job with, even though they have to tell each of their backstories, they do a good job telling sort of an interesting, very short version of their backstories to put you in context. And unlike you, I actually really enjoyed Magic is her name, Ileana. What was the actress's name? The
Anya
blonde woman?
Taylor-Joy.
Yeah. I really enjoyed her performance because that character is kind of a badass, and she plays the badass to the full, and that was really cool. She didn't take any lip for anybody because in her own like realm of here, I'm getting comic geek here for a sec. In the realm of limbo, she is like the queen of limbo. And so, when she's on Earth, she's kind of just like, well, whatever. I can go back anytime and just rule my own sphere or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, ultimately, I was disappointed by this movie. I didn't even understand the overall plot, like where they were and what was going on and why they weren't with the X-Man and Charles Xavier. So there could have been a much better version of this movie. They could have set it up to have multiple sequels, like you mentioned, but it fails on several of those levels. So
Again, I don't think that's the writer director's fault. I think that's studio intervention's fault.
yeah, I mean, God only knows how many versions of the script they went through on this stuff, but it is kind of a muddled mess in the end. And you're right; the performances are not great, with the exception of
Anya Taylor-Joy.
thank you. Yes. So ultimately, that's my review. I agree with you, though. I mean, if you're an X-Men fan like I am, or a New Mutants fan, hey, why not see this movie? It's been past the theatrical release, but otherwise, and this one also, finally, last note, this one does not live up to the horror billing. This is not a horror movie. It's a
No.
dark superhero movie, but it's not a horror movie.
Okay. Having said that, we'll have more surprises for you next week. I will say the next movie we'll review also involves a bear of some kind. And that's where we'll leave it. Uh, I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford Hess. We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.